Nothing you're about to hear should be taken as or used in place of medical advice. If you resemble anything you hear, contact your doctor. If you want to know what Walgreens thinks, ask them, because we don't know. Please wait behind the line for privacy.
You're listening to the Pharmacist Answers podcast. I'm Cynthia, the pharmacist, and today you'll get your questions answered and your curiosity cured.
Today, we're going to talk about head bones. I am going to tell you about my favorite skull bone today. We'll start with the basics so you kind of can get oriented with where everything is, but I'm going to tell you what my favorite bone is. So, your skull, the thing inside your head, your skull is made up of 22 bones. 22. You have 22 bones. Between here and here, and here and here, you have 22 bones somewhere in here, okay? They're broken up into two sections. The first section is your cranial bones, and those are the bones that go around your brain, and then your facial bones. So that's kind of self-explanatory. And 2/3 of your skull is made up of your cranial bones, and you can usually draw a line starting at your eyebrow here and go diagonal down to your ear. And everything above this line is cranium. Everything below that line is face. Kind of makes sense? So it includes the parts of your face that you would naturally think of. Your eyes, your brows, your ears, your jaw. So the main goal of your skull bones is, one, to protect your brain on the inside. And then the other one that you don't really think about is that they play a major part in body movement. Now, you can't really move your skull bones around like on your own. A major part of your skull is an attachment point for other muscles. So it's an attachment point for facial muscles. So your face can do all the things that you make your face do. But it also acts as an attachment point for your neck muscles in the back, so that you can have large head movements. The muscle actually attaches to the bone. So if you didn't have that anchor point, your head wouldn't be able to move with control, or it would just kind of be floppy and likely fall off. So that is not a very obvious purpose for your bones, but it does act as protection for your brain on the inside. And the cranium is made up of about 8 bones. So your cranium, so this is a side view of what like a skull looks like. And so you have the different areas of color. Those are separate bones, and they're connected by the little lines. And those lines, the connection points between your skull bones are called sutures, because they look like they've been sewn up with thread. So if you think of a suture being something that a surgeon does to sew your skin or an opening back together, they thought that they look like stitches. And so sutures meaning like to sew. And if you ever saw me like hand stitch something like with needle and thread, that's about what my hand sewing looks like. I can sew a much straighter line with a sewing machine. But the sutures, the connection points between the bones where they fit together, that's called a suture, because it looks like it's been sewn up. We're going to get to what my favorite bone is. And I'm not going to go through all of them because you could probably figure out some of them. But some interesting facts. The bone up here on your forehead, this is called your frontal bone. Kind of obvious, it's on the front. When you're born, it's actually 2 bones that are separated. And babies, you probably could logically remember, it's been told to you that babies' skull bones are softer and they're not fused together completely. One, because they have to squeeze out of mommy's body, and so having some flexibility allows it to squish and then bounce back without being endangered. But the frontal bone up here is actually in 2 separate pieces completely when you're born, and then the suture down the middle fuses really, really soon after birth to make it one bone. The other ones hem up really soon after that. But that kind of is what allows babies to get the, kind of that cone head look if they've had a really dramatic natural birth. Usually babies who are born by C-section, they don't have all the like the squishing pressure. They come out like really round-headed. It's kind of bizarre. And I guess if I've had 2 natural babies and they all come out kind of squished and they have to like even back out. So a little bit jealous, but not of the recovery from a C-section. Everything fuses. And actually, that separation, because the babies have the soft spot that's like right in the center of their head, right in that bone, that soft spot doesn't become completely hard and solidified in complete bone until about 3 years of age. And then the suture becomes completely fused to where you can't even tell that it's there anymore by the time a kid is between 6 and 8 years old. The sutures in the other bones, you can always see if you peeled somebody's skin off their head and looked at their bones. These sutures you would always be able to see. By the time you're 8 years old, the suture that makes this frontal bone 2 separate bones is so fused. May you tell your story about your daughter's soft spot? Sure, I'd love to hear that. I'll keep talking though, and then I'll read your story. This bone, the suture fuses so tightly, after 8 years old, it looks like one solid bone, and it's not designated into 2 separate pieces anymore. Babies actually have 6 soft spots on their head when they're born. The main one is the one right in the middle. There is one that's smaller, kind of in the back of the head, almost identical in the back of the head. There's 2 soft spots towards the temple, which your temple stays kind of soft. Her soft spot would fall and she would cry, and the mother-in-law would fill her own mouth with water and then turn the baby upside down. Oh, shake her upside down. Ugh, this sounds horrible, Steve. And suck on her soft spot to pull it out. That is bizarre. And what was the purpose of that? Did you ever figure out like why this was happening and like I'm gonna have nightmares? Yeah, that's really freaky. Because the thing about the soft spot is between your skin and your bones, you have connective tissue and blood vessels. When Avonlea got, and this is a complete sidetrack, when Avonlea got dehydrated back before the holidays, like one of the major signs of baby dehydration is that their soft spot gets way depressed and it'll be like really sunken in, because usually just in general it's kind of smooth and in the same shape as the head. But the thing about it being a gap in the bone between your skin on your scalp and your skull is blood vessels and connective tissue. But then between the inside part of your skull and your brain is also blood vessels. So as the baby's heartbeat, like you can see their pulse and their breathing pressure in the soft spot. So that was always something that was comforting to mommies. You have a newborn baby and they're sleeping and you don't want to poke them to be like, are you still breathing? Because that's like a irrational mommy fear in your brain. The baby hasn't moved in an hour. Are they still breathing? But I could watch the pulse in her soft spot as she breathed as a newborn while she was sleeping. And it comforted that mommy fear in my brain to know heart's still beating, she's still breathing because the soft spot was pulsating. But babies are born with 6 soft spots in their head. The main one in the front, one kind of opposite in the back, 2 at the temple, and 2 behind the ears. Everything but the front one gets closed up by the time they're 3 months old. And then the front one allows for rapid brain and skull growth until they're about 3 years old. So that one stays around a lot longer, but it's also the biggest. So it kind of makes sense that if it's the biggest, then it's going to take longer to close up. The other thing about your bones in your head is they're not solid. They actually have cavities and tunnels that I call them tunnels, but they have cavities that run through them to help pressurize everything, and they're all called sinuses. So you have your big sinuses in the front of your face, which are essentially cavities in your bones, and then you have smaller sinuses that run deeper into your head bones that allow the air to pressurize, whether it has to do with altitude or air pressure or humidity or whatever. Having those spaces, so if air gets stuck in one place, it technically doesn't get stuck. It has a way out for things to pressurize. along with all the other pressures in your body. So if you have a skull fracture, is that just one of the 8 bones? Not always, because the sutures are pretty daggum tight. It's bone fusion, just in a place, like it's still, like you can still see it. So possibly skull fractures can happen on a suture where it comes apart, but really and truly a skull fracture is actually a crack in the bone, which sounds awful, but that's kind of how it is. Because the bones are relatively flat, at least on one side, they're very much like plates. So the way that you can crack a plate, is brain bleeding always dangerous? Yes, because your brain is closed in. And that's one of the things that I'm going to get to. Like, always potentially fatal. Not always, but well, any kind of bleeding is always potentially fatal if it's not taken care of properly. But there are a couple of different levels of brain bleeds, and one of them has to do with like how deep inside it is, as to how much pressure on really important things it puts pressure on. Because blood in the blood vessels in your brain, it's designated this amount of space in the blood vessel. And if something causes that blood vessel to rupture and the blood ends up outside of its designated space, then it's essentially crowding into somebody else's space. So that can put pressure on your nerves, that can put pressure on different areas of your brain that may control vital operations in your body, like heartbeats and breathing and kidney function and things like that. Or it can put pressure on some of our more existential places in our brain, so places that control memory and ideas and imagination and those kinds of things. So depending on the place in the brain that the bleed is will determine like what's affected. So if it's deeper in the brain, then it doesn't have a direct exit to get out, so it's going to put pressure on a lot of things that could be potentially fatal. If it's on the outside of the brain, then it's more on the outside, so it's closer to the exit. But because the skull is not very flexible, then if it bleeds enough that it starts putting pressure on the skull and then reversing that pressure back on the brain, then that can still be dangerous too. So there's sometimes when somebody will have a traumatic event happen, whether it's an injury or a car accident, and they'll have a bleed in their brain, and they'll actually remove part of the skull bone to allow that pressure to be relieved, which sounds kind of creepy, but it works because you need your brain. Some of the bones you can live without. So the bones are made where this covers the top of the brain, but where does the bottom of your brain sit? Do you know? Do you know where the bottom of your brain sits? My brain has to sit on something. There's a layer of bones that goes through the middle of your head, an orbital hemorrhage, and a brain bleed. It couldn't feel your legs or pee. Yeah, and so that probably means that the nerves to your eyes and the nerves that translate messages from your legs and the bottom part of your body were pressed on, so the messages couldn't translate. So once the bleeding is fixed and then the pressure is relieved, then those nerves, as long as they're not permanently damaged, those nerves will return to normal function. Yeah, that could definitely be one, because that nerve interruption can lead to paralysis. But also, if the nerve signal isn't getting back to the brain, then you could possibly have an infection or an injury or something in one of those parts of the body, and that part of the body isn't able to tell you that it's hurt or that it's infected, and then you end up losing a limb or with a more serious infection because you weren't able to catch it in time. So your nerves do a lot for you. Whether it could kill you or not, it could really ruin the quality of your life permanently if it's not taken care of in a emergent manner. But your cranium actually has a floor. So if you cut off the top of your head, pulled your brain out, and looked down into your face, and so you actually have bones that run right here through the middle of your head that your brain is able to rest on. And getting to my favorite bone, My favorite bone is called the sphenoid bone. And it is this bone right here that looks like a butterfly. And this bone sits right in the middle of your head. And you can sort of it kind of reaches the edges and you can sort of kind of feel it. This is the bottom of your frontal bone above your eye, right beside your eye. This is your temple. If you feel your temple until you get to like the next hard bony process, that's your sphenoid bone, okay? So you can touch it. The other place that you can sort of kind of get to it indirectly, it's right above your soft palate. So your hard palate, you've got a bone right in here that's made your hard palate, and then you get to your soft palate because it goes up into your sinus passages. Right above your soft palate is the bone. So I guess if you stuck your finger in your throat and you pushed really hard up through your soft palate, you'd be able to touch the bottom of your sphenoid bone. That would hurt. I would probably gag if I tried that, or at least sneeze 17 times, pushing up in my sinuses. But this is why I love the sphenoid bone so much. For anyone who suffers with like major sinus pressure and congestion and allergies, and you're dealing with a lot of drainage, a trick I learned, I don't even remember who I learned this from, but I've used this trick for about 10 years. If you can get your sphenoid bone to wiggle, you can relieve sinus pressure in your face and your head. So the way that I do it is you can, again, right here on the side of your head, when you get to that bony part and you can feel your sphenoid bone, if you push side to side, I hope you're doing this. If you push side to side, you can feel it moving. And you can kind of feel this gradual wiggle inside. But because you have these sinuses and they're coated in mucous membranes, sometimes the mucous membranes will stick together because they've got mucus on them or they've got inflammation in them. And if you can get that to wiggle, then you kind of add and release a suction inside those tiny sinuses, and you can get your sinuses to drain. The other way that you can get to do it, now your nasal bones right in here touch your sphenoid bone deep inside, and so if you can push up with your tongue in your mouth, on the roof of your mouth really hard, and then return pressure on your nose, you get this rocking motion with your sphenoid bone and the other bones that make up your face and around your nasal cavities. And again, you're adding and releasing that suction pressure, and it can make your sinuses drain to relieve sinus pressure and a headache. That is why I love the sphenoid bone. The fact that I can like manually manipulate my head and help my sinuses as bad as sometimes I suffer, it's the coolest thing. And it's a weird sensation. If you like really get it rocking, it's a really crazy sensation. Replaces picking your nose. Yes, definitely. The sphenoid bone. You can find it on any skull diagram because it looks like a butterfly. And the interesting thing, like your skull bones are smooth on the outside, but inside on the side where your brain is, they're rather bumpy and like jaggedy because a lot of the membranes in your brain need connection points. So all of these little bumps and jags and stuff allow the membranes of your brain to anchor somewhere to keep itself buoyant and balanced inside. That's the bones of your head, how your skull's put together, what it does. My favorite bone, the sphenoid bone, because I can actually help fix my sinus problems without taking a lot of pharmaceuticals, which may sound counterintuitive because I'm a pharmacist, but the more natural of a solution that you can have for things, then the less side effects you have from like cold medicines and stuff. Thanks, Steve, for telling me the story about your daughter. That's bananas. That's probably not the way that your doctor would tell you to treat that. It worked and she's fine now. I'm glad she's fine. I don't recommend treating baby soft spots or baby dehydration in that manner. That's a crazy, wild story. And for people who don't have children, that sounds kind of nightmarish for sure. It was a Mexican home remedy. Home remedies are bizarre in a lot of ways from all kinds of cultures and nationalities. They can be bizarre for sure. And I guess like wiggling your sphenoid bone around is a home remedy of sorts. I think I might have learned it from like a masseuse or somebody who actually knows where things are in your body rather than just say, hey, am I unlikely to get any more freaky feelings again? Do you know what caused your bleed the first time? Were you like in an accident or playing sports or fell down the stairs? I don't know. I mean, the brain bleeds can be caused by all kinds of things. Brain bleeds are also, it was an accident. If it was like a traumatic, freaky accident that caused it, then ensuring that you don't have the same type of blunt force trauma. Okay, so you got thunked in the head really hard and it caused your brain to bleed. That could definitely be that's a good reason for your brain to bleed, is something like thunking you in the head. As long as it doesn't happen to you again, like, I don't recommend being thumped in the head regularly. You don't have any other bleeding disorders or like weak blood vessels or just like somebody who bleeds easily. As long as like your normal bleeding is healthy, meaning that you don't bleed super easily, then rarely will it happen again without trauma. At least until you're like 87 years old, when your body starts to break down and things are just weaker all around. But as long as the place is healed up, I'm assuming a doctor would be able to know, because your blood vessels are very elastic and they can take a lot of pressure and crazy things happening to them. Okay, you're 26. So I would expect that your natural blood vessels are very elastic, very healthy, and it would be a really freak thing if it happened again without some type of trauma happening again. Because, yeah, so you're not on blood thinners, you're not on anything to, like, reduce your blood pressure, to make sure that your blood vessels don't get beat up. Taking care of your head, your skull does a lot to protect your brain, but then you kind of have to do the stuff to protect your head. You should still stay in touch with your doctor about those kinds of things, but the probability of it happening again seems really, really low at this point from the little bit that you've told me about yourself. It was really scary. Yeah, losing feeling and losing your vision are two of the freakiest things that could probably happen to you. But now my children are screaming at each other downstairs, so I'm gonna run. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Pharmacist Answers podcast. The pharmacy is now closed. You can post your questions and comments on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/pharmanswerspod. Or you can email the show at pharmacistanswershere@gmail.com. You can tweet me or message me on Twitter at Sin Hendricks. You can find the show notes at pharmacistanswershere.wordpress.com. Pharmacist Answers broadcasts live on Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 9:02 a.m. Eastern Time on the Periscope app. You can follow me at Sin Hendricks or view in your web browser at periscope.tv/Sin Hendricks. See you next time on the Pharmacist Answers podcast.